So on page 902, we're going to look at this data right here. You probably need on page 901 to read the problem. I'm interested in knowing if you can write the least squares regression line. I'm telling you that I'm giving you an alpha level as of 5%. So I want you to tell me if you would reject or fail to reject. Of course, I want to know the test statistic and the p-value. I also want to know, I want you to put the least squares regression in context of the problem and then find the standard error of the slope. Okay, so we're going to try that right now, and then I have a couple of formulas that I need to give you. Okay, so let's start with the first thing. Let's start with the least squares regression line. So what would the least squares regression line be? Let's just start with basic, let's start without context of the problem. So what would you write? If this, without context of the problem right now, how would you write it?
Y hat equals 0.12049 plus 0.008569.
X.
Yeah.
Okay. So that right there, you guys, that would give you a P. If this was a free response question, that would give you a P. Not an E, a P. But there's no reason why you shouldn't get at least a P, an E on this, okay? So what are we trying to predict? So predict would be our Y. So what were we trying to predict? Anybody read the problem? Go ahead, Amy.
Percent of perch killed.
Is that what we're trying to predict, or is that our Y?
No, that's what we're trying to predict.
We are percent of perch kill?
It's like initial number of perch.
Okay, percent of perch killed. Oh, this is a happy problem. Okay, and then what is X? This is what? Number of perch. Now, that right there, notice I didn't put a hat, but I did label my Y and my X. That will give you an E. If this is a free response question, that will give you essentially correct. Because remember, when they grade a free response, it's EPI. Okay. Now, what is my test statistic?
3.49.
So my test statistic would be 3.49. What is my p-value? Is there 3 zeros?
2 zeros.
Is that it? Okay. So now I told you that my alpha level was 0.05. So would I fail to reject or would I reject? I would reject the null hypothesis. And you guys, it still would be the same thing. Because my p-value is less than my alpha level, there is evidence to support the claim, and that's how you would write it. It still goes back to that same thing. Now, what I want to teach you is this question right here, you guys. We noticed that the test statistic and the p-value were asterisked out, right? They didn't give them to you. Well, there has to be a way to find the test statistic without them giving you the test statistic. And there has to be a way to look up the test statistic without you having it right in front of you. Of course there is, because you know that's what they're going to do. You're like, yeah, Miss Larry. Okay, I know it's almost time to go. I just want to give you this formula so you guys know. So this is why I keep harping on the slope and the standard error of the slope. Because the test statistic is always going to be the slope divided by the standard error of the slope. So those two numbers that they give you, this is why you have to know where they are. Because they will ask you to find the test statistic and they will not give it to you. So the test statistic is, again, the slope but divided by the standard error of the slope. And in a least squares regression inference problem, you always have two variables, right? Like in this case, we had the number of perch. In that last problem, we had the number of perch and the percentage of perch killed. So we had two variables. So the degrees of freedom for a least squares regression line when you're doing inference is always n minus 2. That's the only one that is n minus 2. Everything else is n minus 1. It's a little bit different when we have the chi-square test of independence. But for a least squares regression line, the degrees of freedom are n minus 2. Okay? Go ahead, back up.